David, I've decided to become all-American. I've seen the future, and it's called iced tea. It's not the tea that we're used to back in the UK, but hey-ho, needs must.
No ice in the UK? I know you have tea.
Well, we like our tea a certain way. David, there are forces at work that are claiming that the internet is about to be bypassed by this tidal wave of next generation technology called blockchain. Now, the proponents of this technology say the status quo is fundamentally broken, in the sense that you've got all these old legacy technologies all wrapped up in proprietary business models where data are all caught up in these islands between enterprises. And for markets to work, these frictions that exist all bottle up the free-flowing mechanism of the market. Now, markets work when there's trust. My name is Andrew, and I'm qualified to make this purchase. Your name is David, and you're able to embark on a transaction with me. Now, from what I've heard, what I've read, this all sounds too good to be true. It's going to sweep out the old and bring in an entirely new financial services sector. Am I capturing what I'm reading correctly?
I think you are. It all comes down to creating a system of trust. In the current infrastructure, there are silos of information, and each individual company all throughout financial sectors has silos of information and infrastructures that they've built in. What this will do is break down that infrastructure and create shared ledgers, which are shared pieces of information that go all throughout the whole industry. So whether it's where I came from, the back office, working with clearinghouses, there are silos of information, intermediaries, that become the trust network. So if I want to trade with you, I have to bring a third party in to say, okay, well, I'm going to give the stock and you're going to give the money. So that trusted partner has to come in. With this new infrastructure, there's a shared ledger, so everyone can see what's on everyone's books. If I show on my books that there is if I show on my books that there are stocks, and I want to trade with you, we go through a series of nodes, which are other people that have a copy of that shared ledger, and they all say it looks reasonable, and there's a consensus that gets created, and then the transaction can take place. So it changes a siloed mechanism with intermediaries acting as that trusted network. It makes so everyone can see what's on each other's books, which creates trust, because everyone can see and those silos get broken down.
But hang on a second, David. That worries me, because for hundreds of years, capitalism has evolved. Banks have become ever more important. Banks were always important, but besides being the store of value, that's where the money was kept in the vault, they also acted as ever-increasing methods of payment. They became the plumbing that makes all these exchanges possible. What you're describing to me literally takes an eraser and begins to strike all that out. Is that what you're saying?
It does, and it makes things public. So it's out there in the public's eye, and each individual company, whether it's banks or any other financial intermediary, can have a copy of this public ledger. So it completely breaks things down where you don't need to rely on banks or in the financial services industry, clearinghouses, to be the go-between. And it allows two individual companies to make a transaction, or an individual within that, if I have my assets housed at a particular bank, to make a transaction without bringing all this outside work in. It makes things a lot more efficient, and it creates a scenario where it's almost impossible to have fraud, because it double checks on everyone's ledger and everyone's record, or certain parties within the network, to make sure that that transaction can go through. So it completely changes everything, and it's an archaic system. It's been around for years and years and years. That involves cost, infrastructure, reconciliation, all these other mechanisms to make it work. This simplifies all that. It's a big hurdle because everyone needs to buy in order for it to work, for these networks to work, but it's something that can completely change everything and, like you said, change the plumbing around.
Okay, so what you're saying and what makes blockchain special is that it invokes trust, but not just any type of trust. It's immutable. In other words, it can't be undone.
Right.
How then could that then be applied across the financial services sector?
Well, I come from the back office side of the business. At one point I did reconciliation work. It changes that whole infrastructure where in order for a stock to move from point A to point B, it eliminates a clearinghouse and it eliminates the chance for a mistake. Like for me, when especially early on in my career, 20 years ago, there were double bookings, mistakes that were made all the time. There was no infrastructure other than a next day reconciliation, or when I first started out, a monthly reconciliation to see, oh, you know what? I only own 5 shares, but it was booked twice and 10 shares went out. So obviously they weren't there. With this new infrastructure, everything is done in minutes and it double checks. If I send out a double booking, you'll see on each of the other general ledgers that it doesn't match up. So on each of the other company's ledger, you'll see that that particular trade couldn't go through because they only have 5 shares that are available. I'm trying to trade 10 because it double booked accidentally.
So let me stop you right there just for a minute. So if I'm hearing you correctly, are you saying that the move that's currently underway in the US from T3 to T2 actually isn't very ambitious at all? Do you think the financial service sector here is missing a trick?
Well, I think the T+0 is something that could very easily come in the near future. It's a huge undertaking to move from 3 days to 2 days. It took 20 years to go from 5 days to 3 days. So, it's a big step, but no, I think it's patching a system that was created 25 years ago that worked real well because that was the only way to instill trust. But now that these other technologies have come, coming from starting with Bitcoin was one of the first products that were built on this infrastructure where there were nodes and people approved and transactions could happen between 2 people without an intermediary coming involved. And in this day of banks or PayPal and all these other mechanisms that get in between that take money from one and distribute it to someone else, it simplifies everything. Where 2 people can say, you know what, I want to send you money, and the other person wants to receive money, and it happens automatically without having to have an intermediary get involved. That's the fundamental of blockchain, is that it eliminates the need for outside parties to get involved in 2 companies or 2 people with accounts within those companies can have a transaction take place and have it happen T+0. I believe the time frame is 43 minutes it can take.
Yeah, to clear the block.
To clear the block. So so we're going from 3 days to 43 minutes. So that's ambitious. Moving 1 day, it is a big undertaking, and I know for 20 years, they said it's impossible to go from T+5 to T+3, but it happened. It's on an archaic framework, but it is making strides to improve. But I think there's still, by changing the whole infrastructure, like you're improving what you have based on what's been in place for 20 years. Now it's bringing in a whole new idea and a whole new concept that really takes it to the next level.
Okay, so you've spoken about post-trade settlement being an area where blockchain could shake things up. Mm-hmm. What other examples might there be in financial services?
Well, it goes all over. Derivatives, complicated markets. Derivatives are basically a contract. So these contracts can be written on top of the bit chain to simplify the processing and simplify the infrastructure so that everyone can see and can approve and can see what's going on to make sure that all these trades are occurring correctly, and all these trades are on the level. There's less room for someone to make a change or someone to do something that's shady, let's say, because there are going to be 6 other banks or 6 other nodes, as they're known as, approving that trade. And if it doesn't match up 100% with what's on their books, on their version of the ledger or the shared ledger, they're not going to approve it. So whether it's derivatives and contracts, whether it's post-settlement trade, whether it's sending money from one bank to another, it really changes that. It changes the whole dynamic and puts trust in place where there doesn't need to be another party being involved, getting paid and slowing things down like a T+3, T+2 type of environment, and slowing the whole process down. It all happens instantaneous with the computers and the processing and everything that we can move just about anything in a supply chain around these days quickly. This brings the financial services industry up to that same level.
So let me throw a bit of a curveball. Okay. Clearly you're excited by where blockchain will go, but I understand that there's some underlying technical constraints that impact the scalability of blockchain.
It's the same as every new technology. Banks have back offices with infrastructures already in place that are utilizing their technologies in a certain way. So 10 different banks are going to do things 10 different ways, or have 10 different potential back office systems. They need a common communication method so all these different banks and all these different back offices communicate. So the same thing when straight through processing came through and they had 5 different languages. The same thing when, I don't know, VHS and Betamax came out. There was 2 different technologies for how a video cassette was going to be used. Ultimately, one of them won out. And I think, it may be where 2 or 3 companies come and say, we're the standard, and then it'll be where the markets will drift towards the one that seems to be the better option, or the option that's most interesting, or the option that's most accessible.
So, one word answer, blockchain, evolution or revolution?
It's revolution. It's completely going to change everything.
So why is it a revolution?
You're taking an infrastructure that was put in place 25 years ago and throwing it out the window and starting completely fresh. So T+3 to T+2, like we talked about before, that's evolution. Where systems are quicker, they're using technology, it's not paper anymore, it's electronic, so that's evolution. Revolution is completely throwing that system out the window of intermediaries needing to clear everything and putting a new trusted network in place with a shared ledger where everyone can see what's on everyone else's books, and private firms are able to approve things without bringing a trusted intermediary into place.
So David, let me just push back ever so slightly.
Okay.
There's no doubt the technology itself brings about a whole radical proposition to the marketplace. The technology is a disruptor. Mm-hmm. I can acknowledge that. But surely it has to be an evolution, because there are many layers towards delivering a service, mm-hmm. to developing a financial product, of which the technology is part of the value stack. Mm-hmm. Their systems, their processes, and all those need to join up. Surely it has to be an evolution that will just take time to roll out, because the scale of what you're talking about, it almost sounds like, and perhaps I'm being too risk averse, it almost sounds like a nuclear option.
I don't think it has to be all in one day. I think the technology, even if it's in its infancy, it's still a revolution. Just the concept of removing the intermediaries that clear everything, that move money, insurance, stocks, bonds, everything else from point A to point B. It may have to start on a smaller scale, because the internet didn't start in a day, and when people compare, this could be bigger than the internet. It was not what it is today,
But it did take 25, 30 years to get to where we are.
True.
Yeah.
But would you say the internet was evolutionary or revolutionary?
Good question. I would probably say it was a bit of both.
Okay, so maybe it'll be a bit of both that it will take to move this forward, because you're correct. People fear change. Companies fear change. All the big banks are doing a lot of research on blockchain because the idea from a conceptual basis is interesting and it could change things. But will it have to start on a small scale and build its way up the way the internet did? I'm sure that that's true. You can't just flip a switch and change everything that we know in one day. So I think the concept is revolutionary, but there may be an evolutionary process that it may need to follow, because it can't change everything overnight.
You know what, David? I think we need to come back here to this exact spot 5 years from now, play back the interview, and see who was right.
I think that's a great idea.
Thanks, David.